Thank you, Senior. Today, sorry, before that, a very good afternoon to one and all, and welcome to the 10th session of FCPC. Today, we have elderly and vulnerability. In this topic, we'll be discussing autonomy, shared decision making, single member households, loss of partners or peers, problems related to old age homes, lack of availability, restrictive relations violating autonomy, and hopelessness. So for the session, I would like to welcome Professor Alka Ganesh, and she is with Kaliam for many years, and she's a distinguished. She has won the Distinguished Teacher Award by National Board of Education in 2014. She has completed her MD in internal medicine, and she was heading the medicine department of CMC Vellore, and she has a 40 years of teaching experience with her. She is trained in geriatric medicine from UK and visiting professor of University of Malaysia. Currently, she is partially retired and continuing her teaching in online. So I welcome you, ma'am, and please use the chat box for any clarifications. Thank you and welcome, ma'am.
Shall I begin? I can share my screen?
Yes, you have the sharing rights.
Okay, good afternoon to all the participants and the organizers. It's really so nice for me to come and speak at this training session. It is also so heartening to see so many of you are interested in palliative care, and particularly coming for this talk about elderly. So the organizers, Deepa, is it? She told you about all the different aspects of the vulnerabilities of the elderly. That's in the syllabus, but I'm afraid I can't really deal with all of that. But certainly many of those topics will be dealt with. And the rest, which I have not talked about, you can bring it up and I can give you what my perspective is on that. I've been working as a geriatrician since 1996. As it was told by training, I went for training to the UK. And what I saw there opened my eyes to what a lot can be done for the elderly if only we shift our focus and not see them as dependent, sick, that kind of negative aspect. And sadly much of the elderly are in that space. But what can we do to change the whole face of the elderly and the perception of society? That's what I'm really going to talk about. So it was the United Nations actually in 1990, 30, 40 decades ago, that they began to look at the problems of the elderly. And they said that they put out these 5 charters for rights of the elderly. They should be independent. They have the right to be independent. They should have the right to participate in society. They have the right to care, including health care, all other types of care. And not only that, they should be allowed to have self-fulfillment. And fundamental to all of this is they have the right to dignity. And as you can see, if you expand those 5 rights, the 9 is only a few. But, not only the right to life, but right to live in a non-degrading way, liberty, privacy, freedom of thought, whatever they want to think and practice their religion. And to not be put on the heap like you're old. That's called ageism. Can't discriminate a person just because they are old. Now, sometimes often we have to give affirmative action. That's also, you can say, a form of discrimination. We have to give affirmative action to those elderly who require it, who have disabilities, who have vulnerabilities. But at the same time, there may be elderly people who are quite all right within the limits of aging. And they should not be told that you can't do this because you're old. Sometimes my children tell me, why are you still driving? You're quite old. I said, no, but I feel confident. I've never had an accident. I will know maybe after I have an accident. But what I'm saying is, if I'm careful, if I know my limitations, I should have the right to do what I want, and not just because of my age. And then if you have possessions, why should somebody take it away? Very often we see families, the children want to have that earlier enjoyment of what they are going to get when the older person dies. And the older person says, let me enjoy it while I live. Why do you need so much? You're old now. Your requirements should be limited. No, an elderly person can have all the right to the possessions he has. If the person wants to educate themselves further, sure. And the standard of living, what he can afford, and it should be a reasonable one, so that dignity is maintained. So the United Nations has a certain policies they put for every decade. This decade, it is the decade of active aging. What they say is, what do we mean by active aging? Because all of us think of aging as a very negative thing, isn't it? So what is this active aging? So it is really that a person can continue to grow, not particularly in the physical sense, because we know as you age, there is a deterioration, we have to accept that. But how can that deterioration be slowed down? We think it's inevitable. It is inevitable. But does it have to go like this? One moment you're all right, and in 2 years you're very bad? No. That can be made a much slower curve, much more gradual curve. And health promotion is the word that we use. How can we promote health in the elderly person? And when we say promote health, it means promote all forms. So depending on a person's gender and the culture that they live in, all these things are part of the rights. A right to health, social services, how they behave, their determinants, personal, what they can do, physical environment, social environment, the economic aspects. All these things are involved to be of the highest level if the person can do active aging. Because if you don't have money, there's no way that you're going to be able to afford the things. For example, we talk about nutrition. Some of the things they say, take antioxidants. If you look at what is contained in antioxidants, it's all nuts, fruits. Can an average poor Indian have nuts and fruits and life? No. Can they have non-vegetarian if they're non-vegetarian people? No, it's expensive. So money is extremely important. What about health? Most of the hospitals are for young people, for people who, whereas an older person, most physicians hardly know anything about what's happening to older people. So there have to be health personnel, then there have to be social services in the community to carry out those health treatments, because we don't want older people to be in the hospital. We want them to be in their homes where they will have a better life and family around them. So if you look at this whole thing, unless this is all geared to the elderly person, that person, we cannot expect our elderly people to be aging actively. For example, you take social determinants. So many factors of inheritance and so many factors of discrimination, as we've already talked about, make it, and then safety. It's not safe to walk on the roads today for an elderly. Even if you have a pavement, it's not very safe to walk because you're going to trip and fall. So there are so many, that's a physical environment, so many different things which need to be changed in our society. And it's up to you people who are interested in and learning about it to look minutely at all aspects of our life in India and see, is this all right for an older person? I think the awareness is growing, but we need more awareness. And here are some examples from country. Some of them, you look at this elderly lady with her granddaughter, I think. I mean, she's so happy. She's working. She's looking after the bangle shop. This is probably somewhere in Calcutta, I think, because there is a typical bangle here. And she's happy. That's what I mean by active aging, okay? And look here. Are they very happy? For one thing, they seem to be in poorer surroundings, but that doesn't mean just because you're poor that you can't be happy. But at least they've got each other, okay? They are happy to be with each other, but they do look a little down and out, okay? So we can look from these pictures, the different pictures of elderly in our country. Here are pictures of little more affluent people. They are gathered together. This is peer group meeting. And these two are sharing a nice conversation. They are disabled, we can see, because there's a wheelchair here and wheelchair there. But still, they're able to go out into the greenery. This is what is active aging. And look here, this is another more affluent. They look to be quite healthy. They are listening, talking. Maybe somebody's giving them a talk. Whatever it is, it's in pleasant surroundings. So for elderly, these spaces have to be created and they have to be allowed to enjoy life in a different way from what they have done all their years looking after people younger than them. So there has to be a social and cultural shift from the negative perception that we have of older people. What is the negative perception? They're less valuable to society because they're not producing anything. They've retired, forgetting that they have already done that job earlier. So they're seen as less valuable. They're seen as dependent because they're not earning that much. Maybe the younger generation have taken away their money, but very often older people do not have the resources. How many people are pensionable? And have they really built up? Even those who have money, did they save for their pension? So they're a burden on the economy. They're weak, they're frail. Their judgment and decisions may not be quite correct, and we have to help them to make it properly. So all these negative perceptions have to be changed to older persons being holders of rights, as we have just said. So even if they don't have it, it's their right to have it, and we have to work as a society to uplift the elderly people and make them active agent in society. And you might think, what is this? This is all, how can the older person be active in society? We'll see how they can do. And they've got skills, knowledge, and experience. I'm not talking about those who are very ill physically and mentally, but there's whole swathes of elderly people who are quite all right, and they have this rich experience of their whole lives. It can't suddenly be made into nothing just because there was a retirement age, you see. So we have to use those resources to see how the rest of the society can benefit from that. So let's have a look at some of the things which really make elderly people vulnerable. What are the different aspects of their situation, which is, we cannot get away from it. We cannot say they should not be there. It is there. So let's start with here, worthlessness. When a person loses his vocation, he feels, now what use am I? Because you see, he may have been the head of a big multinational company where he had hordes of people under him who took direct orders, and suddenly he doesn't have that behind him. He just has a pension packet. But all these people who were looking up to him, they're gone. His children do not listen to what they say. So he feels worthless. Loneliness, even in the middle, we will see in some scenarios, even in the middle of a family, you can feel lonely. Very often, many may be poor because of the lack of pension. Many people, due to aging or due to illnesses which they had before they became old, they have illness, they have pain, and they have disability. Not that all of this is due to old age, but if you have diabetes when you're 40 and you didn't look after it, by the time you're 50, you've got renal failure, your feet may have had to be amputated, or a toe was amputated, or some other disease like heart disease makes you breathless, can't be mobile, osteoarthritis. So this is something which we think of all the time when we use the word elderly. Their disability, both physical, mental, all types of disability, and that prevents them from contributing to society. So you say that the problem we have is we think that old age is equal to disease. That is a partial myth. That is a partial myth which we need to look at. Of course, as you grow older, there is a decline in all the body tissues. We call that as a degeneration in the body tissues. This is what I'm saying when we say active aging. How can we prevent this decline? Instead of making it a slope like this, can we make it a slope like this? Sorry, you can't see. More gradual slope, so that the person can remain healthy, active, independent, physically and mentally till the last few years of his life. And then, of course, the end has to come. There is no problem about that, no dispute about that. But can they remain healthy for a much longer time? And the time of severe illness and dependence can be shortened. That requires that health has to be actively promoted. From when? From the moment you're born. Health has to be promoted definitely from middle age onwards. It has to be actively promoted. Fear and abuse. Abuse is very common in the elderly. I have done some work on this in the sense of just looking up the literature and found that throughout the world, not just in India, 6 to 10% of elderly are abused in some form of the, and there are different forms. It can be physical abuse, mental abuse, financial abuse, sometimes even sexual abuse can be there. So because they are considered as vulnerable, they don't know how to fight back. They don't know that they have the right to dignity. See, so on this side, I have put up something which factors of medical bioethics. One of it is autonomy. Patient has the right to say and do things that they feel is good for them. They have the right to justice, beneficence, non-malfeasance. These are the 4 pillars of medical bioethics, and it deals with, when you say non-malfeasance, it means that they have the right not to have something bad done to them. For example, if a doctor or a research, they want to say, let's see these elderly people, can we give them this medicine and see if it's safe? Well, they could do it in such a way, elderly people will not complain if anything happens. So we need not be so careful. But we may be actually doing some bad things. Beneficence, whatever you do to a person has to be, the risk-benefit analysis should be more towards benefit. If there is very risky, don't do it. Okay. Justice. And this is where discrimination comes in, you see. So if the older person needs something, they must get it and not say, why don't you give it to a younger person? This is a conversation that we have often. Why are you spending so much effort to treat this older person who is worthless, cannot benefit society? Why not give it to this younger person who has a family, young family, and when there is a question of dividing resources? So there is a philosophical argument that you cannot, no human being can judge that so-and-so's life is more valuable and so-and-so's life is less valuable, and definitely not on this basis of age. But very often the elderly suffer from this kind of a discriminatory attitude. And autonomy, we've already talked about. So with these background that I have given you about what we hope are the rights, or what has been declared as the rights of the elderly, and what is actually the situation. Let me bring forward to you 3 scenarios trying to mirror some aspects of life in our country, in our society, and show you how elderly can be vulnerable in different areas. For example, here's a 60-year-old, and this is an example that is a true example. When I met an elderly widow, as I was doing some data gathering, looking at health problems of the elderly. So we actually went out into the villages, door to door, and were looking at the people. And one of them was this 60-year-old. She was only 60, but she was frail. And she was a widow. And when we went to her house, she was not there. So we waited for 15 minutes and found she was returning back with her cow, which is her only asset. And she had gone, it was 5 p.m, she had gone to graze the cow. And if she didn't do that, A, she would not get the milk. B, she would not earn enough money to for her needs. Her children have migrated to the city for jobs. We all know about this rural migration to urban areas because there are no jobs in the villages. So young people have to go. They have the option of taking their older person with them, but that means an additional burden. So they leave them there. And they have to then fend for themselves and do manual labor as they grow old by themselves. So we ask her, what is all this causing you personally? She weeps and she says, I'm so poor. I am so lonely. I have so much of pain in my knees. I feel that nobody cares for me. Because they've all gone, they can't come back. So how do we begin to help such situations? I leave that for you to think about. Here's another scenario from an urban upper class family. So this is an 80-year-old couple. Between them, they have diabetes, they have heart failure. One of them has dementia. And they have decided to live in a retirement home because they have enough money to live in a retirement home. This is a private retirement home. I'm not talking about the old age homes that are run by faith groups, by the government, etc. This is a upmarket retirement home, which their 2 children who live in the US have bought for them and paid for. And when we went to talk to them, they said, one of them, I slipped, I fell. My wife, she's too weak to lift me up. Our children can see us every minute through a webcam in the living room and the bedroom. They send us money. So it seems to be an ideal situation because these are her children who have studied well, have got good jobs in the US. How can they refuse those jobs because they have got old parents and it may not be possible to take the parents there? So they have fitted a webcam. And this is a very common scenario because I'm living in Coimbatore. There are many old age retirement homes here. I have visited many of them to look after them in home visits in their illnesses. And I see this as a recurring scenario. This is not anything just taken from imagination. So they've got money also. So you might ask, well, these old young children are very good in the given situation. What can they do? But look at this. In spite of all, I slipped and fell. My wife is too weak to lift me up. So obviously, even though they are in this upmarket place, they still have difficulties and there's nobody to help. So in their situation, despite all their wealth, illness, pain, disability is not addressed because many of these places do not have adequate physiotherapists, nurses. They are, first of all, not even built according to the specifications of elderly people. I have gone to many places and said, why don't you have even something simple like a grab rail why don't you have the equipment that is needed for elderly people to be stable when they're sitting on the toilet? Why are the tiles so slippery? There are special tiles. So these old age homes are not built according to the specifications. These people also are dependent. They have loss of autonomy. They have they are abandoned, whether you like it or not, whether you want to say it's not the children's fault, but they are abandoned. There is a virtual caring. This is a word I just made up. The children are looking after them, but virtually. And with this webcam looking at them every day, there's a loss of privacy. Just because they're your children, who gave them the right to see you every moment? Of course, it is done for a good, from a good thought to take care of them. But I don't think any of us would like that we be seen every moment by somebody else. So how can we affect? What are the solutions? We have to improve access to health service. I know that as a geriatrician, that a person who slipped and fell, did they have proper preventive care? Did somebody do a comprehensive geriatric assessment and find out that they had high risk for falls? And if they were found out, did they have the mechanisms put in place to improve their muscle strength and balance? Or if they were having dizziness, was something done so that they did not slip and fall? Now, I'm not saying that just because they didn't have health services, it's 100% effective, they will never fall. I'm just asking this question because I know that many of them do not have this preventive care given to them. So and many of them, even if they can afford it, the services are not available because our Indian healthcare system, geriatrics, is almost non-existent. There are just a few of us who are in geriatrics. We are trying to make the specialty more, increase it, but it's a slow thing. We have to improve home care services so that those who cannot do the activities of daily living, others will come in and do it, especially when children, their biological relatives cannot do it, then the other people have to do it, maybe at a cost, maybe at the cost of the state, or maybe at your own cost. And this is freely available in the developed societies where they able to look after their elderly. So we have to have people in the community who can come into your home if you require it, if you're assessed that you need it, and give you a bath every day, and then go away. That may be the only thing you need. Or it may be that you just need feeding, etc., etc. So specific dedicated services for at least ADL to maintain their dignity and health, we have to have it. It's coming up now, but not as much as fast enough as we would like to. We need more long-term care homes which offer care for the dependent elderly. You see, there are many, many long-term care homes, at least in a place like Coimbatore. But the moment you become dependent, they don't want anything to do with you because they don't have the staff, they don't have the skill to look after you. So we need old age homes, long-term care homes, where somebody who's got poor mobility, somebody who's bedbound, but does not need to be in a hospital. Hospital is the last place you want an elderly person to be in. So are there trained people enough who can look after the dependent elderly? Sadly, that is not so. And so we have a lot of misery and vulnerability here. I'm going to present to you, I don't know how we're doing for time. It's half an hour. So this is to do with an urban healthy couple. This couple, they are in their 70s. They are retired high school teachers. The man has got a hearing impairment. The lady has arthritic knees and she can't really reach the bathroom in time. Plus, she has some disability in her bladder. So she leaks urine. She's incontinent of urine. To be incontinent of urine is one of the most demeaning things that can affect an older person because the smell is there. People don't like to be near you. You have a sense of shame. You have a sense of being very, very vulnerable. That is what we associate with a child. And here you are as an older person, cannot control the urine leak. And for those who have a bowel leak, that is even worse. And many people are put into old age homes because the family cannot deal with fecal incontinence. So this elderly couple who are otherwise well, they are living with their son, the son's children, and the daughter. And the family is quite good to them. everything is not all bad. There are so many families living with their children. The family dynamics is good. They are just little old and they've got individual problems. So you might say, isn't this a nice thing? And in India, we can still say that so many of our elderly people can come into this. But that number is falling because as the nuclear family system goes, as the aspiration of the younger people becomes more and more, they require more and more gadgetry, more and more money to sustain themselves and their children. So to sustain their family, their parents, becomes a little difficult. And because of that, so many sad stories you hear of abandonment. So we had to have a law called the Maintenance of Parents Act, which says that if you, I think it was 2014, if you abandon your parents, you are likely to have criminal action against you. So that had to be taken. Why? Because we were not caring for the older people. Where in India, we pride ourselves that, we'll always look after our parents. And we say, look at the West, they put them in old age homes. No more. We are doing the same thing. It's not that we are different or superior to the older people. The whole world, everybody is the same. We are following in their footsteps, knowing that this can happen. We are still following in their footsteps. When they did it, they did it out of necessity and we blamed them. Now we are doing that and not blaming anybody. So when you ask them, how are they? They say, we have got everything that we need, but we are not able to connect with the grandchildren. They live in a different world. They have online classes. They have phones. They have TV. This is so much more interesting to them. So where are the grandmothers and grandfathers' stories? They've got even better ones on their phones, okay? What about their children? Son and daughter-in-law, they are busy with their jobs. They just about come home in time for dinner or tea, that they've got so many things to do. They have to look after the children, their homework, put them to bed. So there really is not much time. The older people will go to sleep early. There's really not much time to interact with their children. So you can see here how they have loss of purpose, loss of connectedness. They don't mingle with other people. And these are active, educated people suddenly left without a purposeful, enjoyable activities. So is this something that we can help? Surely, for one thing, can we help with hearing aids? Can we help the mobility of this lady? Can we help her incontinence? All these things can be done. Not to 100%, not for everybody, but quite a lot of amelioration in all these. As a physician, I can say not just the medicines that a doctor writes, but with a multidisciplinary team that looks after elderly people. In geriatrics, it's not about the doctor. It's about allied health sciences. It's about physiotherapists. It's about dietitians. It's about people who, audiologists. It's social workers. It's the whole society, actually. So the doctor actually has only a very small part, but you need this multidisciplinary team. But are they geared to look after their elderly? Then you have to improve the social connectedness. If these people were talking to their peers, now with our technology, with the phones, the WhatsApp, they can talk to other people, not necessarily their own relatives, but their friends. So it's very important that elderly people, as they age, they must continue their social connectedness. The younger people must ensure that they meet these people. If they have to be taken in a village society, if they have to be taken to the chai kadai because they cannot walk there, so be it. In the chai kadai, there'll be lots of other people. So in an urban society, if it is a library, many old people are coming to the library. Take them there if they can't go themselves, so that they meet other people, they can discuss their individual difficulties, their aspirations, goals. And it has been shown that those elderly people who are socially connected, they don't suffer from abuse so much because they can easily transmit that information. Otherwise, they are at the mercy of the abusers, who are usually the family members. So it's not that the family is bad, but sometimes families drift apart because there have been some problems. Somebody objected to somebody's marriage. Somebody didn't give this much money. So many things within families. So those family bonds must be strengthened. So those are just three scenarios. I'm sure there are plenty of other scenarios all of you can think about. All of you have elderly parents, or you are an elderly parent, or you know of friends who are suffering because of this vulnerability that elderly people have, even if it's not just about health, but about the social aspects. So community participation is very important. An individual person can do only that much. But if the community organizes itself to make spaces available for elderly, so what do we mean? Here are some phone-in services. This is something that Pallium India is doing. They've got phone-in services and they can help the carer. There may be a daughter-in-law who is so desperate because she has to look after these older people who are taking the life out of her. They are so difficult to handle. So her burnout, her difficulties can be addressed by these phone-in services who have sympathetic people who will lend a ear and perhaps give some advice. And as I mentioned earlier, home care services, so that the family themselves don't have to do everything, especially when a person is bed-bound and needs rice tube feeding. If some home care services like auxiliary nurses or trained nurses can come and give care, not on a 24-hour basis, maybe only for 2 or 3 hours in the day, even that will be something wonderful. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the long-term care services, which are there now for independent elderly people, but very few for those who require a lot of assistance. Peer group support, as I already said, this is something that the community can do. Elder-friendly parks. In our country, you do find in many of the big cities, there are the green lungs. There are so many parks. They're poorly maintained. Unless the citizens get together and talk to the corporation people, these parks are not functional. If they're functional, they're not elder-friendly. The pavement, even one brick being out of place is enough to cause a fall. So it has to be absolutely certified and looked at frequently and maintained. And there should be places for these people to gather together, not in the humdrum, busy thing of the whole society where youngsters may be coming in. There's a lot of activity, something which is more friendly for elderly. Then this is one idea which I'm sure will find some resonance with the participants, is intergenerational activities. The elderly people must be integrated into society. We don't want to treat them here. Here they are sort of separate. This is good for a time, but can they also mix through the generations? So many people have tried that in nursery schools, when children are quite small, can an older person come in who has got no connection with the school, is not shown on the school board as a teacher, but come in and tell stories. It could be a lady, it could be a man, it could be to even bigger children and show them, say somebody did something unique, they can give them a talk. I know I called an older person when I was teaching allied health students, now I'm fully retired, to talk to them about birds. So this person is retired, but he has an interest in birds and he has so many things to share. So I asked him to come and talk to these adolescents and they were delighted. And so was the older person. And we have already talked about this. And then community-based medical and allied health services. So when we talk about community-based, it means outside the hospital. It has been shown by research that if you put an older person into the hospital, his functional ability goes down. Whether he's in for a surgery or he's in for a diagnostic process, he came in with certain level of function. In 1 week, he's not able to do that. Because when you go into a hospital, you lie down in the bed, you follow the instructions. Even if you can walk, you're discouraged from walking. You can walk, but not as you would if you were living in the community. So throughout the world, people are now looking to how can we not hospitalize the patient at all for certain diseases and create the hospital in the home. It's known as hospital at home. So you can't do that for everything. But for certain things which we still hospitalize the patient, can we make that person's home a hospital? And I've done it. I have a person who actually was severely ill with a stroke. He needed feeding. And the daughter-in-law said, can you come and help me to set up everything? She had already done a lot. So I just went there and tweaked a little bit here and there. And she looked after that person till he passed away with full medical attention. So we need to look at community-based. And when we say allied health, we mean physiotherapists. Physiotherapists are very, very important for an elderly person to keep them mobile, to look after their various musculoskeletal problems, to help their balance, prevent their falls. Plus a host of other people also are important, like dietitian may need to come, but to a less degree than a physiotherapist. So we need to do all these things in the community to help improve the lot of elderly people. Financial wealth of the elderly has to be improved. There has to be a mandatory old age pension. And there are national pension schemes. There is a widow's pension, but not all of them are functional. Many of the widows don't know they need something. Many of the widows in Tamil Nadu who get, there's a thing that they should get 1,000 rupees a month from the state. It used to come by money order before. And one old lady told me, the postman takes some of it. He doesn't give me everything. So you see, there are these little things which have to be looked into. So we are in the right direction. We need to encourage every person to have an old age pension. So I want to ask some of you, you all have home, you have people working in your homes. That's the informal sector, maids, servants. Do you know whether they've got an old age pension? Do you know when they leave you, when they themselves become old, that they will get a pension? I don't think many people are just happy to give them their salary and make no provision. Many of them are illiterate. They don't know that there are certain schemes available. So we need to do that ourselves in our own families to get even the people in the informal sector, unorganized sector, to have a pension. Strengthen the Maintenance of Parents and Senior Citizens Act. It is 2007. Subsidized meals and medicines and prompt access to healthcare should be available to elderly by virtue of being old. Not if you don't need it, if you need it. And then better banking schemes. Already in our country, we used to have railway ticket concession, air concession. All that has gone now. I know that I was going by air-conditioned first class whenever I went in a train at half the cost. Man had to got 30% reduction. Women got 50% reduction. So I was going in luxury where there were no flight services. But that's gone now. They say because of the pandemic, we don't know, but that we need to give these to older people. Peer groups example. We're talking so much of peer groups because peer groups can understand what others do. Now, HelpAge India is one very good non-profit organization, part of the international HelpAge India, HelpAge, and we have the Indian chapter, and they're doing a remarkable work. But one organization cannot do everything. They're very interested in peer groups, and they have done a lot of that in the community. And I looked up this, and this says 875 senior citizens associations are across India. All you need is 5 to 6 like-minded senior citizens that meet at least once a week. So I can say that I'm also part of 5 to 6 like-minded senior citizens. And now that I've retired completely as of last month, I have 2 days a week when I play bridge with these 5 people that we have formed. So when the day for bridge comes, from the morning itself, I'm looking forward to, today's bridge. And let me see whether I remember everything about bridge. So they choose an activity as per their common interests, maybe a book club, it's very important, carom, playing group, a badminton group, chess group, and a group maybe that one just wants to learn to use computers. With this, the group provide each other with peer group companionship and thereby provide emotional support to each other. So I urge all the participants that this is something quite easy to do. You don't have to actually form the groups. You just have to plant the seed in somebody's mind, older age person's mind, and then maybe assist them because they don't need, it's a new activity. They don't have to be dependent upon the relative group. So in conclusion, because I think we are almost 50 minutes into the talk, we have to identify the problems of the elderly. And we have to do research to find a solution. Sometimes the research is already done, then we don't have to rediscover the wheel. And the solution should be generic, something that is applicable over different sections of society. So not just for the rich people or just for the poor people, something that can be done across the board. And it is the community, the local community that can give the best solutions, because in each area, the problems and the facilities. And the most important thing is we have to move government to recognize the elder needs. Indian government did pass a rule. They passed a policy called the Old Age Policy for Older Persons in 1999, almost a decade after the United Nations passed their policy about older people. Our country was about 10 years late, but they do have, if you read that document, but how much of it is actually being followed? So the Department of Social Justice does many of those things, and we need to, as individual members of civil society, we need to make the government aware, because government has the ability to expand and upscale anything that you're doing. So if it is for nutrition for the elderly, more protein for elderly people who are living in villages, whether it's for travel, tickets, these kind of things is something which only government must do, and it is their responsibility to do it. So with that, I say thank you to everybody for listening, and I would really like to get opinions and comments from those who have been listening. And those questions that I can answer, I will, and those that I can't, we as a group can look at solutions.
Thank you, ma'am, for that wonderful presentation. The floor is open for you for any questions, comments, anything.
I think Geeta Sequeira.
Yeah. I have one question which I noted down. I know you had already answered it in the solutions. That's the webcam. When a person is in a home, like not a home for the aged, but okay, children have sponsored you, old home, yeah. So how do we, it does invade the privacy of the person. Like if I'm being constantly, like I live alone now.
Yes.
My children are going to put a camera in my home to watch me. Of course, I'm not going to feel comfortable.
Yes.
So how do we find a way to, is there any solution for that?
No, I think a webcam is a good idea. So long as you, from what I can see, are quite able, you can switch it off when you don't want it. But the problem happens, sorry, you're muted. Unmute yourself.
Somebody older than me,
yeah,
like say they're in the 70s and 80s and they're not tech savvy and they have to call someone and they don't want to be monitored, but the children want them, because I know a couple who are going through this. That's why I'm asking this question. And I have spoken to the children about it. They are younger than me. So they think that, oh, just wait for another 10 years, you would understand, your children would do the same. It's not that about they don't understand. I'm 63, I'm going to be. So it's not a question of what my age is, or they're about 75.
This is
So
what
the
we're
children-
talking about, the autonomy of a person, the dignity of a person.
Exactly, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So it's
So this has to be negotiated. Sometimes you have to call a third party and talk to the children and say, you are doing this because of anxiety. It is
Yeah.
the anxiety and their need to care. And they want to see early on if the person falls or something. So if we put in services, I'm not saying that this can happen for an individual case, but in general, if they are confident that their older person is being looked after carefully, they won't have that anxiety of doing it. So it's not something that you can sort out immediately, but it's
Yeah.
something that we have to work towards. And I'm so glad you also brought up this topic, because in many places, the people who have put up the webcams, they think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Complained about it. But I feel that, there are people like you who would not want to be looked
Not
at.
just, no, ma'am, not even just me, even the home that this couple is in, they also feel like the children don't trust them, that they need to be monitored. So whenever they have the time, they would get onto it's connected to their phone or laptop and they're watching. So the home also feels that it's both ways. It's the parents and the home.
Yeah.
So here I intervened with both of them. But
Yeah.
to be honest, not much success.
Yeah, it's basically a question of lack of trust on
Yeah.
this side. So we have to build that trust.
Thank you.
I just want to add something to that. You get webcams which you can just plug in and out. So if you switch it on, someone from their phones, you can access it. If it's off, then you can't access it. So maybe it's the kind of gadget that's used. I think that would be useful and
I
helpful.
think that's what Ms. Sequeira was saying, is you can do that when you're young and mobile, but it may not be
If
possible. Yeah. So think of an older person who's say 80 and bedbound. They're having their
Yeah.
diaper changed. And they don't really want that to be seen, even if it's
Yeah.
children. Why do they want that to be seen? You see, so it's a question of something which these people we have to talk it over and discuss this. Yeah.
I just want to add something here. Sorry, my voice is gone.
No, it's fine.
One of the things that I've experienced is we make a lot of assumptions about conversation topics or discussions that older people would be interested in. We sort of assume that just because they're 85 or 95 plus, they won't be interested in, say, the work I'm doing or in some new technology or in some new breakthrough in science, and that they'll only be interested in bhajans and spirituality, So we come with a lot of preconceived notions. I found in my own 93-year-old aunt in Delhi, who calls me up and discusses the latest scientific breakthrough in something that gives her, she feels connected with what's happening in the world today, And the minute I try to deflect to a conversation, which is, what I think the older people would enjoy, that's an assumption that I'm making that's not necessarily true. So I'm just saying we're so conditioned to believing that,
Absolutely.
topics, yeah.
It's a very, very common thing, very, very common. Or we just, sometimes it can be the other way around. They are very interested in something, but we don't want to talk about it because we are not interested. When I say we, I mean, I belong to the older group. I'm talking as though I'm a younger person. But I know that my own father-in-law, he was in the British Army and he was there when Java fell, and he took over, from the commander-in-chief there. He got a nice sword. And every time he would want to talk to the children about Java, in the beginning, they were very happy. As they became 7 and 8 years old, the moment Tata started talking about Java, they quickly said, oh, Tata, we have to go here. They used to run away. You see, because it was the same old story. So it can be very hard on the listeners, you see. So I used to, out of duty, I used to say, oh, Tata, you remember Appa, I used to call him, that story you were telling me, I can't remember the details of it. And he would be so delighted. So, how there's a tightrope you have to walk. But what you said, actually, I hadn't thought of that the older person may be very interested in what are the new things coming. And they may want to talk about the old things. And we have to individually look at that and promote it. So you as participants, when you're dealing with families, this is a very interesting, very nice point that you can put out to make them feel included. Thank you. I wonder how many people, I didn't discuss this, but find that it's so difficult to care for the older person because if they're living with them, because they're so cantankerous, they're so irritating. And we have to accept that they are. And whatever you offer them, sometimes they are abusive, you know. So how do you deal with that situation? It's very hard on the carers.
You know what you said right now about assumption. I find it so true even with my grandfather when he was alive, because we tried to do things for him. We tried to talk about things. He wouldn't be interested. So we started putting music that was interesting to him so that he watches videos. And it worked very well for some time. But then, because we know he likes it, we used to do it more. So he'll get bored of it. But he'd light up when he would speak about our family history, about the past, about things he heard from his grandfather when he was young, about our family. All that would really light him up. But then again, the thing is, for how long? The family is still limited. So I think it's at times, very difficult to engage older people in things. And even with all goodwill and all, you run out of things to say, you run out of things to do, and they're not very interested in a lot of things you would assume they're interested in. And then their eyesight starts failing. He liked reading. So we'd try to read out to him, but he'd lose interest. It's not the same. It's very difficult to engage. We'd want him to do a little bit of physical activities. My dad would walk with him. He'd do that, but then again, it would be a big, I don't know, a long time thing to convince him that he has to go out of the house to walk and things like that. So it's very,
Yes,
very difficult.
you know, what you're saying is very true, because as younger people, they have other priorities and they run out of steam, you know, because they try, and it's like trying to move a brick wall. But if that energy is there in every member of the family, you know, the burden can be shifted. And also, sometimes we, as Mrs. Chaltani was saying, we assume certain things, you know, they won't like this, or they will like this. Sometimes we can ask them, out of this, and this, what would you like to do today? And that sets them thinking, oh, I've got options, you know. If a person has an option, it may be good. Another thing I find very useful, not with somebody who's got failing eyesight, is the old albums. You know, nowadays we keep taking pictures. Those old days we had paper pictures on this thing, and we don't know where they are. They're in some old album somewhere. This is the time to take it out. This is the time to even open your phone and say, you know, these are the things. Do you remember this thing? And they might say, no, I don't remember it all. Some of them may be having severe memory loss. And so it's a moment for you to talk about, be an active participant in the conversation. So when the older person just wants to talk about something which you have no connection with, it's boring for the listener. So if you can have that two-way conversation by shared moments that you had, and you can think of, you know, remember what happened during this episode? Tell me one thing that you remember. Or do you remember what was served at that dinner? You may not remember. You can just cook it up. Oh, and he can reprimand you. Certainly not. It was this and that. So, you know, it has to be more lively. It has to be spontaneous, naturally. And that can't happen if you're doing it forced. So, you know, in the beginning, of course, you have to force it, but you have to get into the routine. So I'm talking about an ideal situation. And yes, it is difficult, but it's worth pursuing. And never give up. Never give up is what I say, no matter how boring. And in the end, it will be more interesting. When my father-in-law passed away, I felt, oh my God, he had actually received the military cross on the field in Burma. He was a doctor. And every time he started talking about the military cross, you know, our eyes were rolling and we were going away somewhere. Now that we are left with his medals, we say, did we really ask? So one of our family members has actually gone to Kensington or somewhere in England where all the military crosses are there, and he picked out that award in which his citation is given. Now just imagine if we had done that when he was younger, when he was there. I agree, it's an extraordinary thing for somebody to do that, but there was somebody in the family who was very keen to know each and every medal that he had. He was a brigadier. And after some time, he was reduced to just being an old Tata, you see. So, what I'm trying to say is each older person has such a rich life behind them. And I know that in a few years, I think I'm professor of medicine, this, that, not. In a few years, nobody will know me. That doesn't matter because there are so many people like that. But if somebody asks me, my children don't ask me because I talk so much, they've already heard it. I'm in the same position now. So if I start opening, I know that there's a blank kind of a glazed eye appearance and all that, but then later they might regret it. And I've still got so many interests that I don't really, it doesn't matter that much to me, but it will after some time. So, it's a very complex situation and we are just opening up this thing for you to think about and you'll have so many nuances. And the other thing that we need to talk about is exercise and nutrition for elderly people. Somebody like to give an idea about how we're doing for time, about the difficulties they faced or the problem. I didn't talk about it too much myself, but getting people, somebody mentioned, I think, that, we take him to walk and it's so hard. This question of getting older people on their feet according to their abilities. Now, you've got a bad heart and you're not supposed to stand up, that's different. But most elderly people can do a certain amount of exercise, but they don't do it because nobody to help them. They have a fear of falling. There isn't adequate surroundings. It's a challenge. So some people are careless. But you must go with them and show them. Maybe get a pair of binoculars. Hey, from here you can see this, so the walk becomes so much more interesting. So it's a question of really engaging and making any activity very, very, not only a happy one, not just like a medicine. You have to walk because your muscles are this thing, you've got to have your cardiac fitness and all, not just for health, but for enjoyment. And today when I see younger people with Bluetooth and they are looking at their phone and doing their walk, I feel, my God, they're not hearing birds. The outside is of no use. So when I said this to my children, they said, yes, Amma, you can talk like that. But what about when there are horns going here and this thing going there? I don't want to listen to all that. So that's the downside of that also. But I think when we go outdoors, we have to smell, we have to appreciate, we have to notice. These things can be done by a carer who, says, maybe you can't see, Amma, but there's all this happening out there and, things like that. So there's a lot of scope, but it's hard work. Anyone talk about diet? Have you found difficulty in diet, food? So many people.
I just want to contribute something. When my grandfather was alive,
yes,
he had anxious traits and he was also diagnosed with recurrent depressive disorder.
What disorder? I didn't get you.
Recurrent depressive disorder.
Okay.
He was well though. He had occasional sleep difficulties and he was managing his own medicine, anti-anxiety medicine and sleeping pills. The doctor had taught him how to do that. But during the lockdown, he was in his happy place because he's anxious. So he knew he couldn't go to the hospital. So he knew he had to take care of himself. And because the whole family was around him, so everyone would walk around there. Everyone was following a diet that would be good for my grandfather. And the whole family was there. And I think he was happier that time than he was in usual because he was too anxious about his health. And that was the only time, I think, in his life that he didn't really care about his health or he didn't care about going to doctors or switching doctors or something. Although it was at that time that he actually had a hemorrhage. He fell down and had a hemorrhage and he passed away. But then before he passed away, he was in a happy place.
That's good.
And he was doing really well. And I think even in diet, if the whole...
Yeah, very unusual because older people were actually neglected in many ways during the pandemic. But this is a nice story.
And it's very nice. Yeah, thank you. I'm done. It was very nice for us to see that he was doing well also. Yes, ma'am, please continue.
Sorry. No, on diet, getting back to that question, what I found is that I'm talking about my mom and, right now my aunts who are 93 and 98. and battling on, managing quite well, touch wood. It's there are many things that they find perhaps physically difficult to swallow, for example. So swallowing becomes compromised. So we need to make sure that, what they're having, maybe something with honey mixed in it, so that, and the other thing also is the need for timings in terms of meals, because I find that if that goes a bit awry, then so somehow we need a more disciplined, I can sleep late at night if I want to eat late at night, but that doesn't really work for the elderly always. The other thing always has been this challenge of nutrition. I found that Protein X and all the rest of those artificial powders turn out to be quite heavy. And there's a balancing act as a person gets older. Their sodium may be on the lower side or potassium may be on the higher side. So I've always found diet one of the major challenging issues. And somehow I've begun to come around to the fact that whatever a person really feels like eating beyond a point, if they feel like eating something, just let her eat it, because there's so little going in anyway. That's of course at a much later stage, but
you're right. You're right. Because there are many physiological reasons. For example, the taste buds deteriorate. And so they can't taste sweet and salt. So they want more salt. They want more sugar. And then most of them have got diabetes and hypertension, and it's not allowed. So what do you do? How do you get around that issue? Because if you can't enjoy your food, then it becomes a medicine. You see, you want, there's so much enjoyment in food. So one of the things people have suggested is try to enhance, I think you mentioned that, enhance the flavors by things like herbs, like coriander is a herb, cinnamon, those kind of things, so that they're not, the lack of sweetness and salt is not so much appreciated. There may be enough sweet and sugar and salt, but they can't appreciate it. And so you're actually dosing them up. So we have to find alternatives, but I do take your point that if they like this, let them take it. And then what you can do is you can negotiate with them. You can negotiate and say, something, that's if they are not having dementia or cognitive impairment. And you can say, oh, something, you really like laddus. So let's make a thing for you. Man, you can have this laddu, but instead of that, you got to do this also. So you include them into it. It's like a conspiracy against the dietitian and against the doctors, So let's do this and we won't tell, but you have to do this. So that requires a lot of creative thing in your mind. But I like this idea about using other flavors. Because it's a very important thing. It works, it really works. So one may look into that and see how that works. And then you mentioned about swallowing difficulties. See, nowadays, science and dentistry has improved. Many people who can afford have implants, but the good old dentures part of it is still very much there. But dental health has improved. But those with dentures, not many people, it doesn't fit. It's, mouth is sore and all that. So you may have to pulverize the food or, make it double boiled and things like that for them. So that's an individual thing. But what I want to say is the sky is the limit. You can do all kinds of things, and you must, to make the food more palatable and try to make it something which they've already always used to. You try to bring in a new food. It's not possible. They're not going to like it because old people are, tied to their habits. All of us are. And the other problem is it's not just problems in the mouth, taste and swallowing difficulty. There are problems right along the GI tract. So the esophagus also, the food pipe, its normal contraction in some people can be quite difficult. And some of them have severe spasms when they suddenly drink cold water, and it takes much longer to swallow. So it's not that common, but yes, there's also a mental aspect of it. If the person is depressed and is constantly saying, I don't want to eat, that needs to be looked into, because depression is very common in elderly people, has an effect on your diet, and it can be treated. So how to pick up depression? Well, it's not so easy. Even many doctors don't think about depression because they're more thinking about the physical aspect of an older person, because that is how we are trained. We rarely look at the mental and the social aspect of a person's thing. If they're unhappy about something, the first thing that goes is the food. You see, so yeah, it's multifactorial. But I think a family that cares, or if you have outside people who come in to give you that support, they can sometimes pick up. This is something we lack in our country. I was so amazed when I went to the UK and I was seeing how these, there's something called Meals on Wheels in the UK. A social worker has to say that you have only this much money, so you're eligible for this state. So Meals on Wheels will come along, and those people didn't just dish out the meals. They would have a nice little chat and say, so this person would say, I really don't like this. And they'll say, sorry, ma'am, but this is all the menu. But can't you do this? So there was a conversation at least going on, and something was probably happening there. So an older person should be made to, have the feeling that they can change things. So if something is literally shoved down their throat, no, this is what the doctor ordered, it's not going to get anywhere. So ask them, what would you like to do? Okay, you want laddu, but so sorry, that's not quite the right thing. What's your alternative? So when you get into a conversation, may work, may not work. So you have to just find the different things that work. Yeah. But nutrition, somebody was saying about, you were saying, Ms. Chandani, about protein eggs. Now, it's always protein, calcium, B12, these are vitamin D, these are all important things for elderly people because they need it for their degenerating tissues. Protein for a vegetarian, slightly more difficult. But we have soya bean, we have so many cereals now. Ancient cereals actually contain more protein, like millet and all that, if they can digest it. We have to go back into those things, not just polished rice and things. But so most elderly people do not need these protein supplements if you get nothing to beat natural food. But then there is the huge segment of elderly people who can't take natural food because of all these issues, because of, dental problems, because they can't swallow, they've had a stroke. So those people only need these protein supplements. And their protein X is one of the valuable ones. Now there are many in the market which a dietitian can help you, which have much higher protein. So you just have to give one supplement a day. They come in various flavors. If they can't eat it, you can have creatively mix it in something and give it. But yes, so protein supplements are required in elderly people, but not all older.
Just a couple of more things, if I have a minute. One is I found that if you eat with the person, it does help rather than the person eating alone. And the other, which I've really learned from my Delhi 93-year-old doctor aunt, who's the full-time caregiver to her 98-year-old bedridden sister, she makes the effort to take the 98-year-old with the help of the attendants to the dining table for every meal. And I keep saying, Jankari, why don't you just give her the food there in the bedroom? This is so much trouble for you. You're 93, you're not a spring chicken. But, she takes that effort to bring her to the dining table and to eat with her, even if that means a 3-hour process of eating. And she tells me that works better because the older person feels she's part of the community around the dining table. Somebody's eating with her. She's not just sitting on her bed and eating alone. So I mean, it's tough for her to do this, but she keeps doing it despite my calling her in Delhi and saying stop, but she keeps doing it.
Important, very, very important. And that's what's inclusivity. You're including that person. They're not made to feel that they are old. And this walking, sometimes it's not possible, but in those cases where it's possible, yes. But this, your aunt needs to be given a medal. Anyone else like to offer some suggestions, something they experience?
Ma'am, we have a question from Hagit Gal that does the ashrams play a role in helping elderly people?
Which one?
Does the ashrams, I think it is old age homes, she asked, that whether they play a role in helping elderly people.
Oh, yes. You mean like old age homes? Or do you mean like temple ashrams, religious?
That's what I don't know. It's from Hagit Gal. If she's listening to it, please.
Yes. Did you mean like religious body, or did you mean?
Anane?
He just mentioned it as ashrams. So I think he's listening and
Yes, in an ashram, if they want to, if they're going to take care of older people, whoever wants to take care of older people, let's just help them. That's my thing. But sometimes they may need to be a little supervised. Somebody needs to see whether they're really doing. But if somebody puts out a hand to help, I think we should take it because there is so little help available. And yes, it all depends. The family member has to see. And maybe these are people who don't have any family members. Then for all, I don't know. Did you have any particular reason why you asked that question? Anybody would like to also give their opinion on that? Here it is. Harjit, from my
yes.
foreigner perspective, does ashrams play a role in helping? Is it like a foreigner perspective?
Yeah, I think so.
You mean like an NRE?
Mm.
And do you mean should the person be admitted into an old age home run by an ashram? Yes, if you can, just because it's an ashram doesn't mean that they'll be looking after them properly. So you have to vet it. Everybody has to be vetted, especially for old age. I used to regularly go to an ashram run by Catholics for destitute elderly. And I mean, this has got nothing to do with saying anything against Catholics. They were doing a fantastic job. But I found that when some elderly people were complaining, they just told me quietly, she always says this, she's quite happy. She's only saying it because you're here. And that is something I did not really appreciate because, but I could not blame them because they are there with the old person 24/7. I'm coming once in 10 days, so I can afford to listen to them. So, so yes, there are complaints and people may not be that well looked after everywhere, but at least they're helping. Otherwise, they did a wonderful job. And many of the faith-based institutions do a good job. I know about the Catholics and about mainly the Catholics. I'm sure there are Hindu organizations and Muslim organizations and I'm some Parsi organizations. They do so many things, but I personally have not been that. Anyone would like to fill in that gap? They are associated with any old age home?
I think I would say that there is a positive and a negative in any, whichever faith based, whether it's Catholic or Hindu, and I've been to 3-4 different Sikhs. I've had experience with Sikhs who I would say actually are much better, in my opinion. Nothing, though I belong to a Hindu and a Catholic family, so I can represent both. But I've had like my own aunt, my uncle living in Vashi in a home, and the home was very nice. They were very happy with it. And my aunt passed away. My uncle is still alive, and my mother-in-law is alive now. She's going to be 92 in April, and I've got a caregiver for her because I couldn't look after myself anymore. But at one point, she wanted to go for a home, and I just took her for a visit for a few places. And that's exactly what you said. A couple of ladies came up and said, they say this, they do that, but we are not very happy here. So when you say that, when you said, the now Sahoba must have said at that time, but the thing is, what I meant by both ways, the person may be going through the frustration at that home. Maybe the children are not hearing it. Who was put her in the home? Maybe a different change is needed for that person. Or that place has got, I've also seen they're short-staffed. So they are genuinely not able to care, but they do feel guilty to come across, so they have to come and say that, I've seen that in Bandra home, to be honest. And they are short-staffed right now, and they say, oh, this lady always complains. But there is a reason for the lady to complain also.
There's an unmet need. Otherwise,
Yes.
old people won't just complain like
They
that.
won't just complain, exactly.
It may not be
So,
the
but so,
it may be that they're being ignored. You see?
yeah, exactly. It's possible. I'd say it's both ways. So, but I think that problem can be answered only by the person who placed them in the home or the guardians. Like I'm a guardian for 5 people, and I'm the youngest in my house. So I'm going around to all the homes. So I know that.
I wonder whether anyone in this group has read this book by Atul Gawande called I think it's on Being Mortal. Atul Gawande, maybe I will just put it in the chat box. Anyone who wants to, he's on Being Mortal. Anyway, I'll just put his name, and I would really tell you all to buy that book. And I don't know him, and I don't get any royalties by selling his book or by advertising his book. But he talks about the situation in America. It's called On Being Mortal. And he tells about nursing homes there, how they are so terrible. They're institutionalized. They're like hospitals. People wear uniforms. Old age people, the inmates do not like to be there. So something happened, and somebody suggested, why don't you allow these people to have pets? The staff said, no way, the pets will get here, they'll cause infection, this thing, that thing, that. But one decided to have it. And the whole attitude of the people changed. And some said, let's give them little areas to plant plants. Let's give everybody 2 pots. And those who can water. Every day you can see every leaf that's coming out. And so they become so happy, and they, so giving them otherwise it's regimented, institutionalized. Nobody likes to be like that. You're treated like cattle, you see. So putting in that, and that has to be done in many ways, because how do you deal with so many people? I was using an old age home in Malaysia, where I was a visiting professor, and I had to teach medical students about geriatrics. So I found this was a very good place. And I went there, it was mainly the Chinese old age, because the Malays did never put them into, it was the Chinese who did it. I don't know for what reason, maybe it was run by Chinese. And all of them were unhappy. They had serious illnesses, they were all unhappy. And the reason was because from 5 o'clock in the morning, they were taken in line, given a bath, brought back, sent to the dining room, eat. And then, they weren't treated like individual people, and their relatives hardly ever came and saw them. See, so if those people had been given something to do, perhaps I didn't think of it at that time. I was only interested in them because I wanted to teach my students, you see, and I was there for a short time, taught them a lot of geriatrics, but I could see that there was so much that could be done. We can do that. Please read this book. It'll really open up your eyes to problems of old age. I had a copy, somebody stolen it from me. They like
What's the name of the book?
I think it's On Being Mortal.
Thank you.
Well, the word mortal is in it.
I think we can wind up the session, as I don't think anyone has any clarifications to move. So, is there anything to be asked?
Is the book old people friendly?
Sorry?
I want to know if the book is old people friendly.
It's about old people. It's basically this person, Atul Gawande, who's written on lots. He's a doctor. You can even, on many of his other books also, very interesting. And he's come to India also. He's very famous because he's put up a thing called the checklist, how many medical errors happen. And if you have a checklist, all these medical errors can be. So he talks about elderly people who cannot be managed by their families in an American context and have to be put into nursing homes, and how the angst of the child and the person, but how much these nursing homes fall short. And it is elder friendly. It's always looking towards what can be done for older people to improve their lives.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for this wonderful session. On coming 8th and 10th, we don't have sessions. as I think it has been already informed. And on 15th, we have the session on children in palliative care settings. So, so we can wind up this today's session, and thank you everyone, and see you on 15th. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alka, for that wonderful presentation. Thank you all for joining us. It has been noted that only a few of you are submitting the feedbacks on date. I'm requesting all to submit the feedback as the feedback links are shared in your WhatsApp group and in your chat. Please fulfill it. Thank you.
Goodbye. Good evening.